Um, and then the last thing I want to touch on is that with inflation and the high cost of living and the need to maintain county services, the county is going to be moving forward with a sales tax measure. This is going to be put on the county board agenda. I believe it's the first meeting in December, where we will be voting to put an item on the ballot. There will be a half-cent sales tax for the March 2024 ballot. And this sales tax measure would be, it's not a special tax, so it would only require a majority vote to pass. And the funds would provide vital resources for addressing needs that include wildfire protection and response, attracting and retaining frontline workers, improving public safety, roads and parks, and other essential services. And so the full language of that will be on the first agenda in December, and just looking forward to continue to discuss how, what are some of the concerns around how people want us to tax dollars spent. We're really going to be needing support because, for example, as we've started a new Office of Response, Resiliency, and Recovery, we need to be able to fund that office to be able to expand and provide the services that people really need, especially in this community, around disaster response and roads and all the other services that we really need that are not just here, but countywide. And so that concludes my kind of update for today, and happy to take any questions from folks if there are any. All right.
This is not a question, it's a compliment. I'm glad you know we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure that I'm available, and so please feel free anytime there's an issue that comes up, just feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to try to respond and see if there's a solution that we can provide, or at least point you in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for coming to most of our meetings, and thanks for working on our behalf. Okay, so now we'll go to part 2, which was the board nominations. And I should have introduced myself. I'm Dave Rubin, board chair. We have over to my right is Eric Ornis, vice chair, RBDA vice chair, and one of his responsibilities is organizing these meetings. The other board members are not here. We have Lori Taylor, who does keeps track of membership, and Kendra Turkubo, who's retiring from the board from the position of treasurer. Martin Burmeister is the Highlander editor, and Garrett Hammock is, he's recording secretary. And we have two board openings for treasurer to replace Kendra, and corresponding secretary. So if people are interested, get in touch with the board. And now I think Ted Ben-Hari is in charge of the nominating committee, and I see him online. Let's see if he comes over the PA.
Can you hear me?
We hear you. Yeah, we can.
All right.
Hear you great.
Sorry not to be there with you in person, but I wasn't able to do that. Anyway, as Dave said, there are 2 more openings on the board than we have nominees, and so the first 3 people who I'm going to nominate are Dave Rubin, our chairman, who's been doing an excellent job, as have vice chairperson Eric Ornis, and Garrett Hammock, who's the most recent member of our board, as recording secretary. But of course, we don't elect people to the actual office, just to the board. So I'm going to put their 3 names in nomination, and if there's anybody from the floor who wants to nominate themselves or somebody, you have to be a member in good standing with your membership dues. I would open that to the floor right now.
Any other nominations?
Okay, well, unfortunately, you know, we really do need to have a full board to be fully effective. And so we're going to need 2 more people. So I see a lot of names here of people I've known for quite a while, and if you guys yourselves don't have the time or inclination to step up and help us on the board. I'm actually an advisor, not formally on the board. Just talk about it with people that you know, and try and find us 2 more people to help us with the important work that the RBDA board has been doing.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Thanks for running the nomination committee. The elections will be in the January meeting. Any RBDA members who have paid their annual membership dues are invited to attend the meeting and vote. Okay, now for part 3, the main event for tonight, we have here Zachary Ormsby. He was named BLM Central Coast Field Manager last December. He's had nearly 20 years of natural resource management experience, and he oversees the management of approximately 315,000 acres of public lands in 12 counties. Zachary's path to this position began with a graduation from University of San Diego, followed by working 10 years as a biological consultant. In 2014, Zachary was attacked by a wild boar while conducting golden eagle surveys in the backcountry of the southern Sierra Nevadas. His resulting disabilities led Zachary to pursue a master's degree at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he studied natural resource planning, policy, and law. After that, he worked in a series of conservation positions of increasing responsibility for the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. He then joined BLM as the National Monuments and National Conservation Land Specialist, and subsequent to that was promoted to his current position as field manager. He grew up spending summers in Santa Cruz with his family, and he's excited about this opportunity to serve the land and the public in this area. So I know Zachary, you brought some staff you want to introduce, and we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for coming to talk to us.
Dave, thanks for the warm introduction, sir. I appreciate that. A couple things that I did want to highlight in coming up here was to speak on behalf of the BLM and try and clarify any information that the public needs. And there's things out in the sphere that I think are worth clarifying. And so I'm going to talk about some of the backstory on how we got to where we're at, talk about where we're at, and then talk about where we're heading in the future in regards to the Cotoni Coast Dairies onshore unit of the California Coastal National Monument. But the things that are important to me is to have the relationships. I approach my job, it really comes down to being a good neighbor. And I'm not really a decision maker. I implement the law and policy that's established already for the benefit of the American people. And that's really what my job is. And so in doing that, I wanted to bring some of the staff up here that we have that, you'll see throughout the community. And I wanted to bring some of our law enforcement officers who are new to our field office, and you'll be seeing them here regularly, and to provide them the opportunity to answer any questions that the community might have regarding law enforcement in this area and the new national monument. So first, I'd like to introduce Ben Hoke. He is our new assistant field manager, and I like to give him a hard time about that. He's been in this office longer than I have.
Good evening. Happy to be here. Just a brief background on me. So I grew up on the East Coast, graduated with my degree in geology from a state school in Pennsylvania called Millersville University. And then I joined the job hunt looking for whoever was going to hire me first during a time where it was very difficult to find work as a newly graduated geologist. I wound up in an internship program with the Bureau of Land Management headquarters in Washington, D.C. With the Fluid Minerals program, working with their oil and gas division. And then after that, converted that internship into a full-time position as the geologist in Elko, Nevada, which is more or less the capital of the middle of nowhere if you're heading east on 80. About 4 to 6 hours in any direction will get you somewhere interesting. But I had a good time there. I found this position as the geologist in this office kind of by happy accident. But it was a position that I saw the location and I knew that it was a spot that me and my then fiance would be able to settle down and really come to love over the past couple of years. And then earlier this year, it's been just a few months, I've stepped into the role as the assistant field manager, which is the direct supervisor for our team of subject matter experts in the office.
Steve, come on down.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Korsgren. I'm celebrating my 20th year in federal service, which I'm pretty proud of. I grew up in Michigan, so sometimes I have a little accent. Joined the Army, I was in rural Michigan. I wanted to get out of there, joined the Army right out of high school. Served my time as an M1A1 crew member, realized driving a tank doesn't really equate to a civilian job that well. So had to go to school, right? So went to Michigan State University, got my public policy degree, and then I was picked up by the National Park Service right away. So I went to the Statue of Liberty, worked a couple years there. Then I came out to the West Coast and I really never wanted to leave. Went to Golden Gate National Recreation Area, right, just up the road. Muir Woods, I was one of the lucky persons that got to live there among the old growth, just like here. So fell in love with the redwoods right away. After that, I went up and did a season at Katmai, Alaska. I don't know if anyone's ever been to that national park. If you ever have an opportunity, please go, right? That's where the biggest population of brown bears, right, in North America. So it's just amazing. After that, I took a permanent job in St. Louis, Missouri at the Arch, and I was a supervisor there. And then decided needed a little break, went to Hawaii, worked at Haleakala National Park. I'm sure you guys have been there and seen the sunrise right on Maui, just gorgeous. And then decided to come back to California with my wife. I have a 4-year-old. We were at Redwoods National State Parks for 4 years up in Humboldt and Delaware County, which was amazing prior to here. In July of last year, we were lucky enough, Donnie Cam and I came down from the Arcata Humboldt area, and he was with the BLM and I just started with the Bureau of Land Management. And I primarily work at Fort Ord National Monument now. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Evening, Steve mentioned, my name is Donnie Pham. I was born and raised in San Jose, up down the road from the Bay Area folks. So I went to school down in San Diego afterwards, just like Steve, you know, did the military thing for a couple of years, 7 years. And it was one of those days where, you know, I was getting out of the military, wondering like, hey, what would be a good job after the military? What would I want to do if I were to retire? So I looked up on USA Jobs and to be a park ranger with the Park Service. Did that for 7 years, started my career out at Cape Cod, worked at Grand Tetons, Lake Roosevelt, Hawaii, not Maui though, the Big Island. I was there for the eruptions, lava flows and all that stuff in 2018. We experienced what they call the type A event, earthquakes every day, 5.0s and all that stuff, you know, so tough time sleeping, you know, when you have these type A events that occur throughout the day and stuff, you know, you never know what's going to happen. It's not Old Faithful like that, you know, so. Then I came back to the mainland, San Diego, where I worked at Cabrillo National Monument for about a year. And we opted to go to BLM, where I started with the Arcata Field Office, Humboldt County. And we figured me and my wife wanted to be closer to our family. So I took this job down here. So I've been here about a year now. And loving it, it's great. Unfortunately, the cost of living is a little high. But manage it, you know. So,
Thank
Come on
you.
down, Lee.
Good evening. My name is Lee Thompson. I've been here about 3 years under the title of a non-law enforcement park ranger. Dedicated to A lot of the public land we're managing, but most specifically the Cotoni Coast Dairies. I too got my start with the military out of high school. I went to the Navy for 7 years, and I was working on boats after that. And allergic reactions drove me to look for other work. And I had been volunteering at Olympic National Park for salmon. That's one of my big passions. And they hired me. That was kind of my foot in the door with federal work. And I've since worked for Department of Interior, the BLM, Reclamation, and the Park Service in the states of Washington, California, Oregon, or not Oregon, Nevada, and Utah. And happy to be here. Got my start. I was born just over the hill over at Stanford University. And I've been coming back to the area myself. It sounds like a few of my coworkers have been doing the same. We all have kind of some heartstrings attached to this area. And it's just good to get this job and be back here and start dedicating time and effort into the public lands are and right in your backyard. So thanks for having us this evening.
I just have to butt in here. I feel like I belong with your crew up here because I worked for the Department of Interior Geological Survey for 38 years. So I should be with you guys.
That's yeah, so I said I was gonna explain the history of how we got here, but what I realized I didn't do is introduce Zoe. So this is the thing that really benefited me in my recovery from the accident that Dave mentioned. And so she's generally attached to my waist. And sometimes she roams around off the leash, depending on what the duty she's doing and where I'm at. She's super friendly and she comes up to you. I know some people are a little sensitive about it, but she's the boss. So if she introduces herself, go ahead and give her a pet. It's totally okay with me. So I'm going to dive into some of the history of basically where we got, and without going all the way back, you know, the TPL had the land, essentially gave the land to the BLM. And I'm going to refer to this map a couple of times because it also lists this fuels reduction project. I'm sure some of you guys have heard about, and I'll pretty much close out before we open it up to public comment and describing this fuels project. But one of the things that's really important to mention is these things in white right down here are agricultural lands that TPL tried to give to the BLM as part of this national monument. But there's a lot of encumbrances and deed restrictions on these properties, and the BLM was not able to take those. So they still, that was 15 years worth of negotiations, and that's essentially what all the attorneys came up with. So these are still maintained and owned by Trust for Public Lands. And we had been working with them for roughly 20 years, and then came the RMP, which is the Resource Management Plan Amendment. And the BLM is working under what we thought was an agreement with TPL that the road at Marina Ranch Gate was what we were going to use for our southern parking lot. The BLM currently has a 20-foot wide by roughly 100-yard stretch of what's called property easement. It's property right. What we asked TPL for was to widen that or modify that easement so it could be 40 feet in width to allow for safer travel, two-way travel that was inclusive of trailers. TPL at the last minute of our planning process decided they were not going to grant that modification to our easement. That created an opportunity for RBDA and FONC and Davenport North Coast Association to appeal our planning efforts, because in our planning efforts, the BLM had the northern parking lot and the southern parking lot conjoined in that as a being built out at the same time. And we did not have analysis on having one parking lot built at the time. And so the IBLA, which is the Interior Board of Land Appeals, remanded the decision, it's decision number 23 in our RMPA, back to the field office for further analysis. Decision number 24 referred to the southern parking lot, and that was declared moot by the IBLA. All of this information is available on the e-planning website under Cotoni Coast Dairies. And so that remand put the BLM in a position where we had to evaluate or to look at specific language, was take a hard look and analysis of what just the northern parking lot would look like as far as traffic is concerned. So that's what we've been engaged in for the last year, is doing traffic analysis and environmental assessments on what just the northern parking lot would look like. And in that resource management plan, there still is going to be a southern parking lot. It's just looking at them each individually, one at a time. So the northern area is where we've been focusing our efforts now. And once that is complete or resolved, we plan on moving down to the southern area to resolve the parking lot issues there, parking areas. So I have brought some conceptual drawings, basically, as things that we have been looking at and analyzing. Our traffic analysis for the northern parking lot just came in, so we're analyzing that. And these are some of the alternatives, essentially, that we've been analyzing to see what kind of configuration is going to fit the needs of this northern parking lot area. This is one of the original drawings in our resource management plan that was proposed, and it's roughly 80 spots and has an entrance off of Cement Plant Road. We've also looked at this same format with having an entrance off of Warrenella Road into this parking lot, with this being an exit with a right turn only sign. So traffic is diverted out the northern end of Cement Plant Road at Highway 1. That is also the entrance to the monument, is right there. So that's where we plan on putting the sign. That's also where we plan on essentially putting the Google information. So it promotes the apps that direct traffic up to that area as well. And so we're in the process of analyzing this right now. And here's a couple other options that we have been analyzing in this conceptual kind of framework. And as you can see, this is a smaller parking lot that's similar to what was in our original RMP. This has roughly just over 40 spaces in it. And then this down here is almost a hybrid proposal of what we were, the BLM was originally proposing, with what FONC, DNCA, and RBDA had been proposing, and putting the parking area down here along the Mochaccini cheese barn. And so in this analysis, there's a couple of things that I have to point out. This would be a phase 1 approach on the original knoll, and this would be a phase 2 approach, and is dependent on a variety of things. Currently, this whole area is under lease by our cattle operator. Our cattle operator is the #1 tool that we have listed in our weed management plan for reducing weeds and controlling fuels. One of the reasons that that's our primary tool is responding to public comments that they wanted a very limited use of herbicides and pesticides on the property. So the BLM opted for cattle to be the primary mechanism that we control off of. So it's important for us to maintain this relationship with our cattle operator. And this parking lot at this point is on land that he has currently leased, and it's fenced in. A couple of other things to consider is the Mochaccini cheese barn, which is down here, and that is being evaluated. It's called a 106 or 110 analysis for historic determination. We have to do this in conjunction with the State Historic Preservation Office. some of the things to consider in doing that evaluation, it's not just the building, it's a historic site. That's the way that these things are evaluated. So we have to evaluate the structure, the integrity, the history of the structure, but also the entirety of the site. And that's specific for the 106. The 110 is a district where we have to look at the entirety of the relationship to the other buildings in the area that are also historic, right? So that is underway, and that's a several year process in working with SHPO, or State Historic Preservation Office. And then another thing to consider is this whole area floods. There's an ephemeral stream that comes on the backside of this knoll, and we've been monitoring this for the last 3 years. And there are surveys that we can do to look at wetland delineation. It's generally done by the Army Corps of Engineers standards to determine if this is essentially a wetland, and soil that we look at, and vegetation. And then it's also a riparian area because this feeds into Agua Puerca Creek, right? So we have these things called resources, objects, and values. Those are what's listed in the presidential proclamation designating Cotoni Coast Dairies, right? It's 2017, it was Obama. One of the things that we have to conserve, protect, and restore, and that's very specific language that's outlined in the Omnibus Public Lands Management Act 2008. That's also the same thing that created the National Landscape Conservation System, which is where national monuments, wild and scenic rivers, national scenic and historic trails, and wilderness fall into in the BLM. It's about 35 million acres managed by that NLCS program, National Landscape Conservation System. That OPLMA law, Omnibus Public Lands Management Act, is the primary lens that we have to manage those lands through, and we have to conserve, protect, and restore those values. Riparian areas are explicitly listed in the presidential proclamation. Our legal responsibility is to conserve, protect, and restore riparian areas. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done here. Cultural values are also spelled out in the proclamation as well. We do have our legal standards that we have to meet with the 106 and 110. So the earliest anything like this could happen would be 2026, based on the cattle lease, right? So where some of this comes into play, in that proclamation, it says the public will have access to Cotoni Coast Dairies once the RMPA is filed. The record of decision for that RMP was June of 2021. The public has legal right access to Cotoni Coast Dairies as of June 2021, right? We've kept it very limited access and private tours, basically, or guided hikes, and a series of small events with the Autobahn and other groups. But the public has a right to access the land. What isn't a legal requirement is a parking area. So that brings up a really, well, it's NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. It's called a no action alternative, right? So these are preferred alternatives or alternatives. We select a preferred. If none of this gets chosen, what gets enacted is called the no action alternative, which is the public just gets access and there's no parking, right? So it's walk-in access. That falls under a kind of a provision called status quo. And this part of the coast, people parking on the side of the road to access public space is status quo. Some of the issues that come up with that is once parking gets established, unauthorized parking, so to speak, or offsite parking gets established, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the California Coastal Commission, but it has been voiced that that becomes a prescriptive easement at that point. And once that parking is established, it's very difficult to have that parking removed because of the prescriptive easement. So we're trying to find the solution that's going to be right to get this open. Here's some of the alternatives that we're looking at and analyzing. We're analyzing the traffic flow patterns on Cement Plant Road and Highway 1 as well. We hope to have this analysis done really within the next month. And then that environmental assessment will be put out for public comment, a 30-day period. That 30-day period, everybody in here has the ability to comment on all of the proposed alternatives. Every comment gets addressed by a subject matter expert. So it's, you got a cultural question or concern that you put in the comments, our archaeologist addresses it. Got a wildlife concern, or wildlife biologist. You got an engineering concern, our engineer does it, right? So this is a heavily involved public process. I encourage everybody to participate in, and that our subject matter experts are going to take into account all of the comments. They're going to reconcile all of those comments. They're going to respond to all of those comments. And then we're going to make a determination on what's called a preferred alternative. We put that preferred alternative, we file that essentially, and then there's a 40-day period, 45-day period for appeals, right? That's how we got here, right? That right was exercised by the 3 groups that I mentioned earlier. So we have to come back and do this stuff all over again. From my understanding, the no action alternative is not an appealable decision, right? That's just what happens. Why this becomes important is there's conversations that the BLM doesn't have enough money to manage this national monument. And that's true, as long as it stays closed. Funding allocations are based on visitor use and facilities. Without visitors accessing this property, the BLM goes through, it's called a budget allocation model. The #1 metric is visitor use. One of the other top metrics is facilities. So if the public doesn't have access, there are no facilities like bathrooms, funding doesn't get awarded. So that's the point, I guess, our office has been at for the last couple of years while this has been closed to the public, and we're doing our best. We will be bringing on a new park ranger here in the very near future. We'll be onboarding and in the selection process for a chief law enforcement officer to increase our law enforcement presence out here. Can you give me a map of the two areas? The combined little guys. Just a visual perspective, everything that you see here in yellow is managed by this BLM field office. You can see the 2 monuments over on the side. Cotoni Coast Dairies makes up just under 2% of the land that we manage. It will be receiving 25% of the law enforcement capacity that our office has. Fort Ord, it's about the same. It's about 3% of our land mass. They receive 25% of the law enforcement capacity that we have. The rest of these lands, we have to patrol those as well. So bringing on park rangers, law enforcement staff, when we're not receiving funding, it's a big deal for our office to be able to get that assistance where we've been able to get that assistance. Something else that's worthy of note for the community is that baseline data has been brought up as not being sufficient here. And that's something that I would just like to vehemently dispute. That the floristic inventory for the entirety of the property has been conducted by a botanist. We've also done floristic inventory with the Ama Munson tribe to identify culturally sensitive plants. We've done intense surveys on cultural and archaeological resources and maps throughout the property. We have coho and we have salmon on property that we work with NOAA and the local resource conservation district, and have location devices on those so we can monitor movements and population dynamics of those. We've done bird surveys, done small mammal surveys throughout the entire property. We've been monitoring streams for the last years, rangeland health, soil, hydrology. There's an abundance of data. John Barnes from Davenport North Coast Association did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request for all of the biological data that we've done at the park. And his remark to me that it was so much information, it crashed his computer. The entire floristic inventory for Cotoni Coast Dairies is publicly accessible. This is not typical for BLM offices. It's on calflora.org. You can go look at all the plants that we found out there. Part of what we hope and we envision in this effort that we're going through now is I contracted with the USGS to develop a science plan. It's also part of our policy requirements for this place. It's in our policy that national monuments are supposed to serve as living laboratories. Research will never stop here. The research that we conduct here is supposed to be used for the sake of research, but also for applied science that helps manage lands like this that can be rolled out to the rest of the federal portfolio. They count on these NLCS units, these national monuments, to spearhead research that is going to enhance the management throughout the entire federal portfolio. That's our job with Cotoni Coast Dairies. So in contracting with the USGS, we're developing a science plan as part of our policy. We're also developing that plan for the entirety of California Coastal National Monument. There are 5 other onshore units, not just Cotoni Coast Dairies, but 5 others. What we're doing at Cotoni Coast Dairies is going to serve as the framework for the other 5 units. We're developing this program in a way that's never been developed with BLM. We're spelling out the resources, objects, and values that we're legally required to manage by. We're partnering with the University of California, Santa Cruz to invite faculty and student researchers out to help us conduct research to meet our legal obligations, but to do research for the sake of research, and also to create the next generation of scientists and land managers. We're doing that in a way that it's going to create, it's called the PLC, it's a Public Lands Corp, it's a special designation. These student researchers, while they're out at BLM, and they're getting paid, right, through internships, right? So they're earning a living, they're going to school. What they're also gonna get is time and grade as a federal employee, and they end up with something called the direct hire authority. They don't have to compete for jobs in the federal government. They don't, specifically, they don't have to interview for them, right? This is a Hispanic serving institution. The partnership extends to the entire UC system, but we're developing it first with UC Santa Cruz. And members of the Davenport community. Don Kroll is leading that effort. And so we're trying to innovate at Cotoni Coast Dairies for the best land management practices possible while creating cutting edge science and bringing up the next generation of researchers. And it becomes difficult when you don't have any funding, which goes back to the visitor use. And I can argue all day long about the way things are, but the reality is that's just the way they are, right? So we've worked with in partnerships in trying to develop this, and our neighbors around are helping to bring this vision to reality. And part of what brings this vision, this science plan to reality in this framework is called the Friends Group. And Conservation Lands Foundation is made up of former federal employees. They get behind national monuments and they help stand up Friends Group. And that's what we envision for Cotoni Coast Dairies. So there is a board of directors from neighbors, the universities, from business, from the local communities that sit on this board of directors to help implement the science and the research and the projects that are done at Cotoni Coast Dairies, right? So there's active engagement and involvement by business, local communities, and students. And so that's where we're at now. That's what we're actively doing right now. The future, there's a couple ways to spell that out. Depends on how the EEA goes, right? And if it's litigated or appealed. When it becomes open to the public. Getting down to the southern portion and providing access in that particular area. Those are the things that they're down the road. Probably what most of you came here to talk about is the fuels reduction project or to learn about, right? And so this is a partnership with CAL FIRE, who's doing fuels reduction project up here along Bonnie Doon Road. Pardon, I get emotional sometimes talking. This is where the BLM is coming in to do the rest of the work, take down Highway 1. We've recently gotten PG&E to commit to removing all the hazard trees along the power lines along California coast, Highway 1. What I'm talking about is a response to public involvement in a couple of ways. I've been in this community enough times where people have come up to me and they pointed out the dead and down trees by the fire station in downtown Davenport, right? So we're gonna remove it. One of the other issues people keep bringing to my attention is the 100 feet of defensible space that's needed around your residence. And how that becomes difficult when that extends onto federal land. What do you do? We're doing it. That's our response. So we're gonna create 100 feet of defensible space around the entire town of Davenport and all the residences there and the residents in Newtown. We're gonna use cattle, sheep, our fire program, mechanical controls, hand controls. We're gonna get the dead and down trees out. And we're working with Bill Henry, because that's also a grove of monarch butterflies that overwinter in that eucalyptus grove. And we just met with Bill to talk about the impacts of monarch butterflies and how this removal project can create better habitat for monarch butterflies. That also falls in line with the Davenport Monarch Butterfly Habitat Management Plan that our scientists created, Mike Powers, with Bill Henry years ago. We haven't shied away from learning about monarch butterflies and how to manage for them better. We created a management plan for the town, in fact, to do that. We assisted in that effort. So there's concern about the monarchs where the parking lots are proposed. It's great information when somebody brings it to our table that, hey, there's a species and it's important and you need to work to protect them. That's what we do. That's what national monuments are for. So we don't take that lightly. So this fuels project, this is what I'm going to get at when it comes to community involvement. I talked about those conversations that I had down there and residents letting me know that they were scared about the hazard trees on 1 and us being able to reach out to PG&E for that help. But part of this project, this fuels reduction project, came when I was at fire training. It's called MS 581 training. And the table I was sitting at was with the hotshot crew. It was here during the CTU fire. And I showed them the graffiti from Davenport. It says, "We love BLM." And it brought hotshots to tears. That's why I get emotional. Those aren't guys you see often brought to tears, but they don't hear that. They don't hear how a community responds and respects them for the effort that they put forward. So it's through some of those conversations and this information getting back to our fuels program that they want to come out here and take care of this community. My field office can't pay for this. Our fire program is paying for this. So that's where your community input matters. Right? That's why I'm inviting you to participate on the environmental assessment, to leave your comments. They're heard. We do our best to incorporate them into our land management to do the right thing by the community. We're here to be good neighbors. We're here to invite people to Cotoni Coast Dairies so we can share how special of a place this is. And I'm going to venture to say you have some questions. And one of the reasons, like I said, I brought the law enforcement officers here. It's why we're going through the process of hiring another ranger and a chief ranger for our law enforcement. I get that the community has concerns about enforceability of laws out here and what the potential of opening a place like this is going to do. So if you have questions, you want to talk to our law enforcement officers about it, ask them directly. These guys are well experienced in managing just these types of things. If you got questions about science, law and policy, I'm your guy. But I'd like to turn it over to the community and see if you have any questions, you have any comments.
Here in the room, if you would mind going to the microphone. So that folks at home can hear you.
All right, guys.
You can come right here, Lisa.
Oh, that microphone.
Yeah,
I'm
that
so
way.
confused. Oh, thank you for lowering it for me. So I just wanted to start out by saying thank you for all the help during this season. Oh, wait, I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Lisa Shallop, and I live in Redwood Meadows Ranch, which is directly adjacent to the monument, right down the road here off of Bonnie Doon Road. So I wanted to start off by saying thank you for all the help during the CZU fire. Those guys definitely saved our neighborhood. There's no doubt about it. We can pass that message on. I wanted to thank you for the emergency egress that was cleared. We noticed that. Thank you. And I wanted to thank you for the plans for continuing the shaded fuel break, because that's all very exciting. I'm also on the Bonnie Doon Fire Safe Council. One question that I did have as a concern is hunting. So I know the scope has been reduced, but the fact that zone 2, which we border on, is part of the core habitat for animals. And regularly on our trail cameras, we do see mountain lions. Sometimes they have cubs. You know, based on the research from Chris Wilmers at UCSC, any kind of human presence definitely affects those animals. My question is, or my concern is about hunting and whether that fits in with the core habitat that is required in the proclamation.
That's actually a fun question for me to answer right at this point. So you're talking, when it talks about hunting being allowed on the property, that's bow hunting, right? And Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife goes through and does prey surveys to determine what prey availability is and if they would issue permits, and then we have to approve that process. We've just begun contributing to Chris's research, and we'll formalize the agreement. What would be hunted would be deer. We want to understand what the impacts of that prey are, or that as a prey item to the mountain lion habitat, so we can understand how our decisions impact mountain lions and the deer population. And we're going to use those data to inform our land management decisions. But as of now, there is no immediate plan, and there is no data that supports hunting on the monument at present. And Chris will be consulted, and his data will be looked at once we reach a formalized agreement to evaluate those decisions moving forward. And that's also movement data, right? Not just of the prey, but of the mountain lion. It's an apex predator. And all of my research, published research, was raptors mainly, at looking at the impacts of the wildland urban interface on prey of apex avian predators. This is not something that's unfamiliar to me, and this is just how the office is choosing to respond to that question at this time.
Hello, my name is Lee Otter, and thank you for giving us that fine briefing, and that's much appreciated. My concern has to do with baseline studies and so forth, and so you want to dispute that a bit. Well, I'm not here to dispute that. I believe in baseline studies. I appreciate the work that BLM is doing along these lines. I was particularly interested, though, in having more information about how the baseline studies would inform resource management decisions, and how it would inform decisions about providing visitor use facilities, because the BLM seems to be faced with the same issue that same mission as the National Park Service has, which is to protect the resources, yet provide for the public use thereof. And so any clarification along these lines would be helpful, and I'm especially impressed by management plan for the real estate that's upslope from Coast Dairies, managed by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz, where they have a resource management plan that is both based on baseline studies, biological baseline studies, and it has provisions for limiting, redirecting, or even cutting back on visitor use if resource impacts are detected. And of course, we don't know what kind of resource impacts are happening unless you have a baseline. You have to have a starting point to measure from. So that's my thinking on it. So I'll be interested in any further views you might have.
Sure, I appreciate the question. The BLM is pretty comfortable at this point that we have a well-established baseline understanding of the biological resources at Cotoni Coast Dairies. As far as all the vegetation, trees, streams, water, seeps, springs, cultural, all of that. So we feel pretty comfortable that we have a well-established baseline. Now, monitoring something like visitor use impacts, we don't have any visitors yet, but we're actually required by the California Coastal Commission to monitor specifically for visitor use impacts, right? So we have to do that for them, A. B, the conserve, protect, and restore mandate that I mentioned is law. This property has to be managed to conserve, protect, and restore natural resources, primary. If there is a use that is incompatible with the conservation, protection, or restoration, it can automatically be mitigated, eliminated, postponed, changed, or altered. We have what's called a supplementary rule package that is going through the Federal Registry right now for approval. This is a suite of almost 40 additional rules for the BLM to be able to manage this property. The most rules that I know for another national monument are 12. Most national monuments have no additional supplementary rules. This one has 40. That allows us to create signage that will limit daytime use, will limit activities. It comes with a suite of tools for us to use so we can conserve, protect, and restore as our primary lens and alter. It's right. It's generally called adaptive management. We're going to learn stuff as we go. That's the reality. So we needed these rules to allow us to be able to adapt more quickly. They're working through that process. The other thing of mention, this all gets put forth in what's called a manager's report. All national monuments have to do it. It's a requirement for the NLCS program. It's one of the things that I did when I was in headquarters. Those managers' reports for every single national monument are now available online on that national monument's webpage, and they're 508 compliant and accessible to the public. So we're completely transparent. Visitor use impacts will be included in that report. That report will also be shared with the California Coastal Commission in our effort to be completely transparent to evaluate how we're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We have a question from our online participants. Are there any plans to tackle invasive plants that are not palatable to cattle, such as purple star? No. I'm not wearing my glasses.
Purple star thistle.
Thistle, yeah.
Yeah. So we've already drafted a comprehensive weed management plan that is also available online. If for some reason you can't find it, Eric or Dave can get a hold of me and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. Purple star thistle, yellow star thistle, these are all things that are very difficult to remove from the environment, and generally manual removal is what works best when it's timed appropriately before they go to flower and seeds are dispersed. So what we do have at Fort Ord National Monument right down the way is we have what's called a weeds crew. That is exactly what they focus on, is the removal of weeds. And so 20 years ago, basically, when Fort Ord became a national monument, it was an artillery range. Think about that for a second. Today, it is the largest expanse of coastal maritime chaparral on the central coast of California. right? That's a huge transition in a 20-year period of time. Part of it has to do with the relationship with the Army and how funding comes across for that. And they get such high visitation. They have a decent budget to have a weeds crew. Part of what supplements that is they use goat grazing and sheep grazing. And that program is generally managed by these interns that we have. We have this agreement with Cal State University of Monterey Bay, where in lieu of a master's thesis, a master's in a science program can do an applied internship doing research at Fort Ord National Monument and not do a thesis, right, as their master's requirement. That process helps us understand what the biomass and fuels reductions are by our goat and sheep grazing programs out there. What it has also done is promoted the discovery of 4 brand new species and of plants on that monument, and a 5th is in review. So the long-winded answer to your question is we plan on replicating what has worked so well at Fort Ord at Cotoni Coast Dairies to deal with star thistles, purple, yellow, and a variety of invasive and noxious weeds.
Great answer.
Any other questions from local audience or Joe?
No, I'm not. I'll just bend over because that's the way I usually do. My name is Joe Christie. I was a board member of the RBDA from, I guess, about 2003 to 2010. I am the founding and continuing president of the Bonnie Doon Fire Safe Council, and I am also the I was the founding, and now I've returned again to the presidency of the Santa Cruz, the Fire Safe Council of Santa Cruz County, a mouthful. And I've been asked to ask some questions about fire. We've been lucky enough to have Keegan Galuri come regularly to our meetings of both fire safe councils every month. Keegan has been off fighting fires in the last month or two. And so we had Ed Fulton, who designed this fuels management plan, come and speak to both of us. And we were very impressed by what you've done and how it ties in with what we have done, working down through the San Vicente Redwoods and tying into things, projects we've done. So I applaud you on that. Keegan's predecessor, Mike Chodini, was a great guy, and he saved the town of Davenport by doing back burns and introducing fire as a tool. We're very interested in using fire as a tool because it's the way this landscape was maintained for 7,000 to 10,000 years before Europeans got here, and they seem to have done a pretty good job of it. They, of course, didn't build houses. So with that long preface, and you can tell I was once a college professor, so I love the sound of my own voice, but I'll try to limit that. I wanted to ask, to put forward a question that was put to me is, what about fireworks? Firearms are prohibited, but there's a long history of people, especially around the 4th of July, going down to the coastal, what was once the coastal part of the Trust for Public Lands, the Coast Dairies properties, and setting off some major fireworks, and they often set the driftwood on fire. How are you going to deal with that and hope and keep that from spilling over into the grasslands, which just gives me nightmares, the thought of people shooting off fireworks up there. I have a second question.
You want to take this one out?
Yes, please.
No fireworks.
Excellent. Here. The other thing that's of concern is the patrolling and the law enforcement. So Can you tell us about how you're going to patrol, how frequently you're going to patrol, where you're going to be based, and will you be available and accessible to the community at large?
Yes, thank you for that question.
There are multiple parts.
Multiple parts, Joe. I kind of one at a time. No, that's a good question. So what we have worked out in this field office is we have kind of a roving patrol, meaning we do saturation patrols. 3 rangers can go to 1 parking lot if we're having issues there. Say it's the 4th of July and there's fireworks. Guess what we do? We work late, right? Just like this hunting season or anything else. We go where we believe where crime history takes us. And so we do know on July 4th to be in those hot spots, no pun intended, to make sure that laws are followed. It's one thing to say that fireworks are prohibited, but it's another thing when a uniformed ranger is sitting in the parking lot and the kids roll up and they're like, I think I'll go down. So I mean, that's basically how we handle firework things. And we have a whole slew of tricks we can use. You know, we're gonna have hardened parking lots like we do in most places. It's gonna be day use only. So we can have physical security called fences to close things out, force people out of areas, keep people moving. I mean, those kind of deterrents, if you make a place kind of difficult to commit crimes, people will move on. So that's kind of how we're gonna control.
Yeah, and I've dealt with fireworks in the past. It's called, a community called Shelter Cove up in Humboldt County. So we worked with CHP, the county, to enforce, fireworks restrictions. Now, we obviously, BLM, fireworks are prohibited. But on the county side, it may be safe to do so in certain spots. So those are maybe designated fireworks spots. And with talking about roving patrols, you asked about how often we'll be out here. Like what Zachary was saying, maybe 25%. When we get to that, if you see the need for increased patrols, or saturation patrols, and we'll respond to whatever, like Lee would see, he comes out on a daily basis. So he'll see something, he'll contact us, we'll come up, respond, or when necessary. So all it dictates on visitation, and increase crime, increase homelessness or transients, whatnot. So it's all dependent on patterns that we see.
I'm gonna jump in and add a couple of things. The chief law enforcement officer, ranger that we're hiring for right now, one of their first orders of business is going to be to create and establish a memorandum of understanding with the local other jurisdictions that are in this area. So there is better communication and working relationships and enforceability in this area. The other thing that you will notice when this becomes open to the public, there will be a strong law enforcement presence out in this area by BLM, because that's the tone our team would like set to dissuade things from starting off on the wrong foot is the easiest way to say that. And I would venture to say, once the monument is open, you will see BLM law enforcement rangers in this area more often than you will see patrols or presence from any other of the law enforcement jurisdictions. And if you find at some point that I'm wrong on that, you can call me and tell me.
We have another question from our online participants. What endangered or rare species have been identified on the property and what steps are being taken to protect?
This could be my favorite question of the night. Really, the salmon that I mentioned earlier, the coho and steelhead that we have in San Vicente Creek, that is a population that is not supposed to exist based on the fragmentation of that creek. So NOAA is studying those and the movements and the demographics, the physiology, the movement of those fish, because it's really a unique subset of the population to study. And they're doing that in conjunction with the Resource Conservation District, who's removing invasive species out there, clematis. And they're also doing some restoration activities that allow debris to accumulate in parts of the stream when it benefits spawning habitat for the fish. It's actually, it's great science that they're doing out there, and we're doing it with our partners. The other species, its most prominent T&E species out there is the red-legged frog. Our ecologist in our office, Dr. Mike Westfall, is one of the world's leading experts on red-legged frogs. In fact, we have 9 ponds at Cotoni Coast Dairies now serving as breeding habitat for red-legged frogs. And we do population samples of the newts, salamanders, the red-legged frogs, and he works on a large group to create interconnectivity across the landscape to ensure the continued success and the population rebound of red-legged frogs.
Law enforcement? Yeah. There's two things about it. My name's Colin Hannon and I live in Davenport. There transients and kind of people camping out on the side of the road has been a hot button issue for folks in Davenport lately. And I'm just curious, as you guys were talking about that, what would you do if somebody parked in that in a parking lot and wouldn't leave, or said their car was broken down or something? What would be because there's all these things, it's difficult. The sheriff has difficulties with managing those situations. I was curious what it would be like for you guys.
Absolutely. In the past, at any federal jurisdiction place that I've worked, it's usually handled, obviously, a face-to-face contact. That's the first thing. Talk about what's going on, what's happening. Most people want to get out of federal land because we have fences, we have gates, we have physical security that actually closes, will keep you stranded. What's unique at this property, and I noted it here, it was the same in Humboldt County. Transient populations tend to stay within 5 miles of services, gas station, grocery store, etc. I don't see that here because, again, that costs people more money to burn their heaters and RVs, all that stuff. Hopefully, it's not a huge issue. Like, I understand people are on the beach overnight, but that's accessible. And if we can handle the areas in the parking lot and to ensure that we have adequate presence, which means we're there during the day, people will know. And I'll tell you something what I've seen in my career for federal, we don't have many staff, right? There's 3 of us for all that land that they showed you. The thing is, though, we have a very unique presence where we can self-dispatch. We're not going through a chief of police. We will have a chief ranger. But if we see a problem, if we hear from a community member, hey, this RV's been here 3 nights, I believe they're trying to live here, we will go. We don't have fixed hours. We have, administratively uncontrollable overtime. We can go dispatch and handle that problem, because what I've seen is if you can handle a problem in the first 48 hours, then it won't become a reoccurring. Right. And that's what we do best in the Bureau of Land Management. We just go and handle it immediately, and we don't have to triage a lot of calls. We're not going call to call like Santa Cruz County or something like that for other public safety issues. So, yeah.
That kind of leads to my other question.
Oh, go ahead. About the RVs or campers who won't leave. We have tools that we can utilize, give them warnings until we contact the tow company, who shows up with a tow truck, then they leave. That's the experience I've ran into. We give them ample time, okay, find a resource to go fix this RV or camper or whatnot. And then once you see a tow company show up, they're off. They'll do whatever they do, just get out. So that's their domicile, right? That's where they live. You don't want to lose that.
Right.
So,
yeah, it has the places where you can just pull out on the side of the road. There's been issues in Davenport. So I was curious. Thank you for answering those questions. Then the other question, which is kind of maybe wishful thinking, but will you guys be able to enforce laws outside of your property?
do you want to ask But no, we say
because
sure.
There's a shortage of that.
So there's adjacent to there is a nexus to BLM property, and that goes along the lines of MOUs with the county. So short answer is yes. It depends.
Yeah, I mean the fireworks thing is there's a lot of that going on that never gets addressed, like down at the beach. But there's a lot of other things that happen that never get addressed because nobody has the time to get up to Santa Cruz because so much is going on in Santa Cruz, they can't make it. So if you guys are up there, I just wondered if you can help with some of that.
If it's not
shortfall.
close to BLM, then no, you know, it's not.
What's close?
It's hard to describe.
Okay.
I mean, it's all on, you know, the boundaries and what we call land status and stuff, you know. If it's touching BLM, then yes, I would say that's close.
All right.
And so this property, unlike, so I work primarily at Corridor National Monument, we have 1 million visitors a year. And it's gonna look kind of similar with our supplemental rules that we're gonna have in place for closures and things like that, because we don't have vehicle use on the property up there. We have a dusk to dawn time curfew, 30 minutes before sunrise, 30 minutes after. So a lot of mechanisms put in. And the thing is what we do to manage any of these places, this area is proprietary jurisdiction. Okay, so what that means is we don't have concurrent means we have state arrest powers at Corridor. We don't have that. The federal government has not blessed us with that. And we never want to violate your guys' legal rights or the citizens' legal rights. We don't do that as federal officers. So it's just our jurisdictional inventory says we can't enforce certain laws off property. However, if we're called for assistance, absolutely. And we all have training under Penal Code 832. That's a California statute, makes us peace officers. So we can go if we see any kind of crimes in progress, things like that, absolutely. But can we move an RV that's not on our property? No. And that's probably what you're asking.
No, that isn't really, no, that wasn't what I was asking, actually.
Hopefully that answered some questions, but yeah, if it's a life safety threat, absolutely, we can act as any peace officer in the state, but it becomes more limited if we're just dealing with other kinds of crimes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That answered it, yeah.
We have another question.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I have a fun question. So I know it's broken up into 4 zones, and I know the lower part is mostly reserved for cattle. And there's the northern and southern projects, and I realize all this depends on funding and nobody's suing. But assuming pipe dream where everybody's happy and life progresses and you guys get lots of funding, will those 1 and 4 ever get connected? Like the north and south recreation zones?
You know, that's a really good question, right? And that's currently the way that they're separated is preserving 2 zones for ecological benefit, right? And so they're really only going to be open for permit, for research. And the other 2 where we've concentrated the visitors are really classified as highly impacted and highly degraded areas. As we continue to monitor the situation and conduct the science and the data to inform our decision-making processes, RMPs, RMPAs generally come up for reevaluation every 5 years is kind of the standard process. So I can't speak 20 years into the future what the data is going to suggest that we do, but that's what opens up the RMPAs for different planning efforts is, hey, we have all of this new data now, and maybe we find that the coastal prairie restoration is going well where we have some of the high visitor use impacts right now. And so we might want to limit visitor use impacts. Maybe we want to disperse that across the 4 zones. That we can use that data to inform those management decisions. And it's every 5 years that it comes up that we have the opportunity to do that. And that then goes through that public comment period again.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jonathan Whitwer. I'm the president of the Friends of the North Coast. And another one of our board members is with me, Marty DeMare. I just wanted to start out by thanking Zachary for all the improved relationships and communication that we've experienced from him. And I think, at least speaking from my perspective, a lot of that probably has to do with his experience with the National Landscape Conservation System. Because that's where he worked for a while, at least from our end of things. Friends of the North Coast, I guess I would say is not local area focused, It's the broad North Coast and more about the environmental issues, which the the National Landscape Conservation System, as you just again repeated tonight, is dedicated to. So we've appreciated that very much, and we appreciate all of you for coming up here and giving us a chance to piggyback a little bit on rural Bonnie Doon here. I guess I have two just quick questions. One is that we've heard a lot about the supplementary rule, and our three organizations actually circulated and spent considerable time trying to give our input into the draft that came out. I guess at least I wasn't aware that it had advanced. I'm glad it has advanced and that it's, I guess, being made part of the Federal Register. How do we get a copy of what is actually the final version that's being forwarded or processed, I should say?
Well, so part of what it goes through is it's called the digital tracking system. It literally goes from our office up to the state, up to headquarters for NLCS. It goes through an entire chain of people. Every bureaucratic level that you can imagine within the organization gets a chance to make comments on that before it becomes a final document. So when it does become a final document, or once their reviews are done, then can absolutely share what those supplementary rules are like. And I'd love to tell you there's an exact date on when I would expect delivery of that. But I have no intention, to misrepresent the truth, John.
So as I understand it, then it's still internal within BLM, so.
It is.
I didn't quite understand that from what you said before. It sounded like it was maybe out there for a public comment again or something, but okay. And I'm guessing the same is true about the traffic study that you referred to, that that's not going to be available to the public until, I guess, when you put out your proposal? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. The environmental analysis, we hope to put that out within the next month. The traffic engineering surveys that we conducted for the area literally came in yesterday. I haven't even had the chance to read them. I just know that they arrived.
All right.
So now we get to start our analysis on what that looks like. So
step by step.
yeah, and it's ambitious for us to be able to analyze that and put all of these pieces of the puzzle together in the next month, but I'm confident that I can honor that commitment.
Well, I'll speak for Friends of the North Coast, but we actually have all three of our organizations spent considerable time communicating among ourselves, kind of like, I guess BLM has its internal process. Ours is not that formal, but we did that with a purpose in mind of trying to speak with one voice as much as we could anyway, so that you get some feedback from us that's not all over the map. And we would like to continue to do that. I know that I think I can speak for the other two organizations, because that's how we approached it all along, and nobody has said stop doing that. So we hope that we can use the relationship that's improved and find ways to work together and give you the input from the people that have been at the meetings you've so kindly conducted. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And if at some point it comes up where I want you to stop doing that, I'll ask you. Otherwise, expect it to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have one more from the community, from Garrett. You mentioned funding can be tied to visitor use and requires some monitoring. Will there be a development of visitor use management plan that includes monitoring, perhaps in line with IVUMC frameworks? Am I speaking the right acronym, sir?
It is so government, Garrett. I have to wonder where you work. There's a variety of things to look at, and I'm just going to be completely honest with you. Traditionally, the BLM has relied on road counters, right? Estimating traffic that comes in and out of the monument, multiplies that by 2.4 because it's average vehicle occupancy, and that's how we come up with our visitor use numbers. It's antiquated. There's really innovative research out there. And when I say we're partnering with the university, there are things that we're going to look at is how do we better account for visitor use numbers, right? It's no secret, I think, to this community that the rail trail is going to come up through from Santa Cruz. There's a pedestrian bridge plan that's going to bring people over, and road captures are not going to count any of it, right? So we don't know. And I just told you how keen the powers that be are in using visitor numbers to establish the budget allocation models that determine funding. So it behooves us to be innovators in collecting data specific to visitor use, specific to the impacts of visitor use. So we can hopefully lead efforts there. What is it? It's not the maze in Arizona, the wave in Arizona, really famous national monument. They've had this permit system down there for years that relied on you going into a gymnasium just like this. You draw a number, it was like a bingo number, and then they had a ball that spit up the ping pong ball. They would call that out, and then you would see if you got your permit to go that day, right? So you had to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's random geographic location. They found that to be widely inefficient and a number of complaints. And there's a lot of man hours, surprisingly, involved in counting the ping pong balls and calling out the numbers. And so I'm laughing at myself, but it's really not funny. So they've created within a cell network a geofence is what they've done. And so you can now register as long as you're within this wider geofence that now incorporates 2 gateway communities, because each one was arguing where the bingo thing should take place, so they could get the occupancy in their small town. And so now they can spread that out amongst themselves because they have this geofence that is set up that's based on your cell phone data. And as long as you register for the permit and you're within this geofence perimeter, you'll get a notification on your phone on whether your permit was awarded that day. And so that's super innovative for the BLM to do something like that, to go from ping pong balls to a geofence. And so when we talk about the visitor use data here and how we can better understand how that's impacting the resources we're legally required to manage, I expect to be innovators here. There's a thing called Silicon Valley right over the way. There's fantastic universities in this area. And I really think that we could come up with something better than road counters.
Thanks, Zachary, and your Zachary's BLM staff. And to follow up on Jonathan's comments, it was really interesting for me to hear, in particular, Zachary's answer to the question about baseline studies. Thinking back to when we had a meeting comparable to this, I forget how many years ago, maybe three years ago, when Zachary's predecessor from BLM was here, and when the discussion of baseline studies was raised by a number of members from the audience, the response was, well, BLM didn't have money for baseline studies. And I remember that quite clearly, and many people from Bonnie Doon community were surprised, trying to figure out a solution, getting donations from non-government organizations to cover the cost of the baseline studies, and then seeing the contrast with that tonight and hearing Zachary's commitment to the baseline studies was quite a contrast. So thanks.
Y'all for tolerating me tonight. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Super.
Oh, that's good. If they're getting the
All right, thank you all for tuning in, all you online. Thank you.
Daniel?
Stop the recording first. Stop the recording.
Okay.
first, and I represent.